Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Welcome, everybody.
Good morning.
This is Vernon Oakes, and the program is Everything Co-op. We're glad that you're with us this morning. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Washington, D.C., and we have Matthew Epperson on with us this morning. He is, where are you, Matthew?
I'm in Athens, Georgia. Also a beautiful day here.
Fantastic. Okay, so it's a good day in Athens, Georgia, good day here. Matthew is the employee ownership domain expert at Zolidar. So quickly, what is Zolidar?
Zolidar. So we are a startup app business, and so we're building the easy button for employee ownership transitions. So we want to make that process a lot easier for small business owners, as well as advisors to small business owners who are kind of on that precipice of succession. So they're looking to transition, they want to sell their business, and we want to be a partner for them in that process.
So anybody want to sell their business, you're going to bring out this app to help them in this whole process of selling it. Buying it, the employees buying it. That's the whole intent. The employees
Exactly,
buying
yeah.
the business.
We're certainly kind of thinking about this in a broad sense as well, because we know that, there's so many things that regardless of how you exit your business will be helpful to a business owner to get ready for that sale. So we do have sort of like a broad scope of like, we want to help any selling business owner, but we also definitely want to build a special conviction for employee ownership.
Okay. So you're in Athens. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up and go to school?
Yeah, so I grew up in South Florida, in Tampa, Florida. And, I grew up with, fairly modest, sort of suburban middle-class family. And, I had the privilege to attend a private Catholic school. And I had parents who, very much believed in, the education for their children. So, they put me through private school, which, I think I'm proud of that. And it's a privilege for me. And really also grew up with sort of like really strong working class values. So my father worked for the United States Postal Service, and, really kind of hit home for me of just how important it is to, take care of your folks. Like he was a very compassionate leader. And I think that always kind of stuck with me about how he was in the post office, working with so many vets and folks who had just like lots of different kinds of like health conditions that like, it was interesting to me in hindsight how like that was so often the conversation is like taking care of folks was just so a big part of that job,
No, I don't know that because that was not my experience. I had family members. I never worked in the post office, but I had family members, particularly one sister in Jersey, where her supervisor seemed like didn't care about the health and well-being of her and the other people. The story she told me.
Yeah, I think part of the reason I probably got that impression is because many of my father's coworkers were diabetic, and so I am also diabetic myself. And so I think that probably was a common topic for us because I had I still do have juvenile type 1 diabetes. And so I think that's part of why the health conversation probably came up a lot is that, many of my father's coworkers were type 2 diabetic. And so I think when I was diagnosed, it made him start thinking about health in a whole different way.
And I am diabetic, hypertension. It seems to run in the black community. So you're a white boy, so it runs in the white community too, huh?
That's right. Yep. And yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's becoming so common. So I think it's becoming such a common, thing we can talk about with each other is like diet, exercise, how it all connects together for sure.
Yeah, my mother was type 1 from 3 months old, very early age, and my father was type 2, and it runs is deep in my family, which gets to health issues and choices that one makes. Yeah. Behavior
Absolutely.
choices. Diet and exercise. Okay, so where'd you go to college?
Yeah, and so that kind of actually also starts me on sort of my professional journey as well. So I ended up going to college at the University of Georgia here in Athens, and it was while I was going to the University of Georgia that I actually first learned about co-ops. And really, my first co-op experience was in a grocery, a consumer-owned grocery cooperative, and that was kind of where that journey kind of came together, I guess, with what I was just mentioning about like thinking about my health, thinking about my wellness, coming into the co-op space. It's like I think the grocery co-op movement in the U.S. is just, very attuned to that sort of thing of like things like what is healthy food, local food. That was really my introduction was as a college student, starting to hear about these terms for the first time, what is sustainability, what is local. All that was kind of coming up when I really got started with the grocery co-op space.
So what were you majoring in?
Yeah, so I was actually a psychology undergrad, and I think for me that's just kind of like a very broad interest in people. I think a lot of times when I mention that to folks, they'll say like, "Oh, don't diagnose me."
Yeah, well,
Like as though like I gone into it because I'm like, "Oh, my friends are crazy. I need to give them diagnoses." You know? But I think for me, it's just like it's an interest in people, really. It's like, what is it that, drives us to become who we are? And at the time, I also speaking of like kind of like where my mind was at the time, I got very interested in like climate change and then like activism as a student around that kind of thing. And so really being a psych student for me ended up becoming like a big question was like, well, okay, so we're facing this like climate change challenge, right? So what are like the psychological aspects of that? How do we like influence behavior? How do we actually get folks to kind of change their behaviors? And I think at the time, I was just so much more focused on like the individual choice, like did person X choose to recycle? Did person Y choose to compost? These like more, did they take short showers? Did they turn off the lights when they left the room? Those types of decisions where I was like, oh, we need to come up with just the right, psychological mechanism to make people choose the right thing. I think that was kind of how I was looking at it at the time. But yeah, as we'll kind of get into, I think that's kind of how I grew up is like thinking a little bit more about sort of the systems that stand behind those kinds of things.
So what year did you graduate?
It may be hard to believe, but I was a 2011 graduate from University of Georgia.
Okay, so you've been out 12 and a half years.
That's right. Yep. I know. I often joke with my fiancée Julia that I'll probably be carded until I'm 80 when I check out at the grocery store if I've got alcohol.
That's a great thing to look young. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great thing. So you had to make behavior choices early on because of your diabetes. Okay.
Absolutely.
And that got you into looking at food. Okay. What's the best foods for you to put into your body that your body can handle given that you have diabetes? Your pancreas cannot process the sucrose,
Right.
the glucose, that it can't process it. So it gets in your blood and it can literally kill you if you don't put the right fuel in your body. And that took you to co-ops, food co-ops.
Yeah, it was a little bit indirect, in the sense of like so when at the time I had a campus job, so like so many college students, right, I had to get a job. And so the job I got was working for food service on campus. So I was working for one of the dining halls. And while I was there, one of my coworkers was familiar with the food co-op and was just kind of aware, yeah, that like I was also kind of on this journey thinking about my food choices and really just recommended it to me. Like, I think you should really go look at that. I mean, at the time you said that weird grocery store on Prince Avenue.
The weird grocery store with weird people, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe that's how I struck him. But yeah, that really was.
Oh, I wasn't thinking about you weird. I had it that grocery stores, particularly in the 60s and 70s, food co-ops were hippies that were sitting around, doing pot and yogurt and all of these different kinds of things. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, and there was a few things that were like really special about our little grocery store here in Athens. It's called Daily Groceries Co-op, and the fact that it's more or less I mean, at the time, it has since moved, but its location at the time was more or less a house. So it was like 1,400 square feet. Not literally a house, but basically like it's just a shotgun straight away hallway kind of that went from front of the store to back of the store, and you had like just a little bit of deli preparation area and a little bit of storage space and a little bit of office space. But most of our space was just shelves and product, and just the cash registers. So, trying to operate a grocery store, even back then, so this is what, 2010, 2011, when I was starting with them, we live in the land of big box, and that is just weird, trying to operate a house grocery store.
And what did you do there?
Oh, it's more of what did I not do there? I mean, so I ended up working at Daily, I started off as more or less we called it a working member, kind of like a volunteer. That was back in probably like 2010, and I ended up stepping away in 2019. So yeah, it was almost 10 years I was there. And in that time, certainly every department I worked in, I didn't work as much in the deli, so I didn't so much pick up on the food service part, but more or less everything else, including serving on the board of directors, which really, that was my introduction to governance, was like, how do you serve on a board? And also what kind of came next for my professional journey came because of that. So that was going into the St. Mary's Masters of Cooperative Management, which, I probably wouldn't have ever heard about that if I hadn't been serving on a board of a food co-op.
Okay, hold on a second. You went from doing every job in the store. You could wash the floors or stock the shelves or be the cash register. Did you order food?
I did, yeah.
Receive food? Did you pay the bills?
I sure did, yep. That was actually my biggest role, so I was kind of finance bookkeeper for the majority of that time, as well as human resources. And, I was really the right hand of the general manager for most of that time.
Okay, that's a lot of experience. And from what year to what year did you do that?
Yeah, 2010-ish to 2019. So it's like just kind of coming into the beginning of well, not quite the pandemic, but getting toward it, that I made a shift at that point.
So are you using your psychology degree at all?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's a yes and a no in the sense of like always working with people, always getting into like what motivates folks and, how do we inspire folks? I think the way that maybe it connects the most directly today for me is probably just in like the ways that I think about motivation in employee-owned businesses and in co-ops. Because I think a lot about like the differences between like extrinsic and extrinsic motivations. And I know that's kind of psychological theory in a way. So I think it's just, to me, it's a underappreciated part of our movement really in the cooperative space is like how it is that when we share ownership, we bring out that intrinsic motivation for a lot of folks to like be able to kind of bring their whole selves to work. Lots of factors involved in that, of course, but in theory, at least, when we design for shared ownership, I think we're also designing for intrinsic motivation. And that, to me, just kind of brings out the fullness of people, their creativity, their joy. That really just kind of makes it an enriching experience, ultimately.
Okay. I want to come back and talk about the motivations, but let me keep going down the time frame of what did you do? So your bio talks about you spent time creating the Georgia Co-op Development Center. When did you do that?
So yeah, that was 2017 that we were really getting that rolling. And so that was just to connect it to what I was just saying. So I did the St. Mary's Masters of Cooperative Management from 2012 to 2015.
Oh, wait. Hold on a second. You said that real quick. I'll make sure I got this. You got your undergrad degree in psychology, and then you went back and got a master's degree in what again?
Yeah, cooperative management.
Okay, and that's in St. Mary's, Nova Scotia.
Yep. Yeah, it's an online program, which is great. So it allowed me to continue working at the food co-op while I was going through the master's program.
And they teach you how to run a co-op, manage a co-op?
Exactly. Yep. So it's like a requirement, actually. At least I don't know if this may have changed, but at the time you had to be a manager of a cooperative to enroll in the master's program.
Okay. And so yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to give a quick snapshot about that program for the listeners. So it's an MBA program, but it's really just designed all for co-ops. And so it's going to examine all sort of the same kinds of topics, like human resources, like what else? Accounting, yeah, gosh, just everything, strategy. Yeah, basically everything you could think of for an MBA will come through that program, but all through the sort of co-op lens, So like taking the cooperative values and principles, those 7 principles, and just asking the question of like, well, how does a co-op do that slightly differently with those member owners in mind? And yeah, it's really to this day, it's sort of the only sort of like super, so specifically dedicated of a higher educational program. There's getting to be a few other folks who are, doing, like certificate programs and independent studies that allow you to kind of do something kind of like that. But it's at least within the English speaking world, it's still really unique.
Yeah, I had looked at them for a PhD. They don't have a PhD program in co-ops, but there is a gentleman out of Seattle, Washington that got his PhD there, and he did it putting a program together. So,
yep. I know just the gentleman you're referring to. And yeah, I'm in that boat too, actually. I haven't done anything with it yet, but I've been trying to plan out maybe a PhD eventually. Yep.
So, 2017, you started the Georgia Co-op Development Center. Why did you do that?
Yeah. So really, and thank you for bringing me back. I was trying to connect that thread. So graduating from St. Mary's in 2015, the last assignment they call the capstone. And so that's kind of, I think they changed maybe the name of it, but at the time we called it a capstone. And it really was just sort of like, what is this ultimate project you want to focus your efforts on? And for me, what I chose was sort of like broadly speaking, the U.S. Southern cooperative development ecosystem. So like, how is co-op development? Otherwise, how do we help startups and conversions with co-ops in the U.S. South? What's here now? And a little bit of an analysis of like, what isn't here now? And really, that was the connection point for me, is that like moving into 2017, it was trying to use some of that work and see that there's a common piece, there's a common piece of movement infrastructure, you might say, which is a co-op development center that serves many other states, but we didn't have one active in Georgia. And so that to me was the thing that I wanted to contribute from having been through this master's program, and really just looking around and not seeing as many co-ops in the South. Or I guess at the time I didn't quite appreciate like, okay, well, there are actually lots of co-ops here in the South, but not necessarily as bold, you might say. We're not telling the story in the same way that maybe the Midwest, Northeast, the West Coast,
Mm-hmm.
they can get a little louder about it, it seems like. So yeah, I think that was one part of it. It was like, let's make it easier for startups. Let's make it easier for conversions. And yeah, just really try to provide movement and infrastructure that we can get together the right folks who have the right skill sets. Like that was one of the first things I did in forming the Co-op Development Center was, just reaching out to my networks and my contacts and like, so who is a co-op focused attorney? Who is a co-op focused CPA? Who are these, open book management practitioners and folks who have sociocracy and other skills that we could actually all bring together into like a group of folks who can provide services.
Did you find many co-ops in Georgia?
We did, yeah. And at the time I just sort of maybe naively was just like almost the equivalent of Googling, like basically like I typed it into the Secretary of State database in Georgia. And I just, typed in the word co-op, I typed in the word cooperative, and I just like got a list that way. And, so doing that, I don't know how many hits I got, but it was a huge list. And I think I quickly realized when I was looking at the hits that like, oh, it's interesting to me that like, oftentimes, fast food chains, for example, will form like these marketing cooperatives to be able to like purchase their goods. So like you start seeing common fast food names coming up in the list of co-ops, and you're like, what are we talking about here? Mm-hmm. And so I then realized like, okay, if we, use that kind of Big Ten approach of like, let's just use the word co-op, then like, yeah, you have a huge array, certainly the Ace Hardwares and Carpet Ones and folks that, most people would never be like, oh, that's a co-op, start to show up in that kind of a list when you just like go to your Secretary of State and you ask the question, who's a co-op? So yeah. And then, also being aware of like directories of different organizations, the electric co-ops have their directory and food co-ops, et cetera. But yeah, just starting to get some good data really, I should also shout out the University of Wisconsin because a lot of the data we were relying on came out of the University of Wisconsin because they've just been such, uh, public-facing leaders in terms of like statistics on co-ops.
And I'm surprised they don't have a master's degree program at the University of Wisconsin. Yeah. With all of the
Yeah,
work they do with their center for their cooperative center.
absolutely. Yep. I'm sure it's of interest. Yeah. And folks are probably doing it, but maybe more independently.
So you used the word that the folks in the South do not shout out co-ops as much as people in the other parts of the U.S. I have found that it's like nobody in the co-op world really shouts out co-ops. There's no motto like "got milk." Okay, where is that motto that identifies the co-op space? And there's just I don't know. In the Wisconsin study, they talked about 130 million Americans belong to co-ops. Unfortunately, most don't know because they belong to a rural electric co-op or a housing co-op. They may know in a housing co-op, but they don't know in the credit union space. They don't know that they're in a co-op and how it works, and they can be on the board as you were in small 1,400 square foot food co-op. You can get on the board. You can, even perhaps get a job in a credit union. So there's a lot of room and a lot of space for people to grow in this co-op world, but folks don't shout it out. It's just not known, and that's one of the reasons for this radio show, to get people to understand about co-ops and this, which I want to get back to in a little bit, intrinsic motivation that you talked about. Okay, so we got to 2019 when you left the food co-op. You had started in 2017 the Georgia Co-op Development Center. You graduated from St. Mary's in 2015. Where did you go at 2019? What was your next step?
Yeah, so actually, I made the shift. Speaking of to what you just said, I actually got a credit union job at that point because I was looking for a different experience, and I think being very interested in the role of money, capital. I got very interested in like, okay, well, what's a really practical way I could do that? And so, getting a job at a credit union was a great way to just experience a whole other. To your point there, like there is such a diversity of the cooperative experience, and just like being a whole other world. Going to become a frontline member. They called me a member advocate, so I was basically like a frontline, what you would otherwise call a banker. I became a banker in a credit union, and really got to see firsthand there of what's it like doing lending experience. I'd never been a lender before, and so we were moving car loans for the most part, but even with that sort of simple but often like really crucial transaction for folks being able to finance a car, just seeing the co-op difference in a whole other light, of like how is it that a co-op would take that equation of like how does someone get a car and make it different, make it work for people on a not-for-profit basis. And so I got to see firsthand of like the power of just refinancing, for example, which that probably sounds the most dull thing I'll say today, but I got really excited about refinances because I could see the kinds of rates that like some of these more like frankly extractive car dealers were charging people for their car loans, and like I can refinance that down from a 20% loan down to a 8% or even lower sometimes. Just that kind of savings for folks, just really incredible. So yeah, that was my.
Let's explore that a little bit. So why do you think people would take out a car loan at 20%?
I think it's probably because they didn't have a lot of better options in a lot of cases.
Their credit score was probably not good, and they probably could not get in and get a 1% or 0% car loan that the new car would be going for. Somebody would put out this great deal. So they end up getting a used car at very high rates. Okay. What did you learn in that job as a loan officer doing refinancing of car loans?
Yeah, no, it's exactly the way you're saying, Vernon. So it was really about like people are more than credit scores. And I think that was the big takeaway, is that like that's how the credit union movement does money differently. Is that like, yes, we do participate in that system in the sense of like we're using these credit scores, if it's Experian, TransUnion, et cetera. We have these FICO scores. So we have that system in place. We're still pulling credit. We're pulling from that same database. But like what we do with it once we get that data is just really different because we want to have an interview with that member. We want to get to know them. We want to talk to them about their circumstances. What is their job? How long have they been there? How long have they been with the credit union? I mean, I found that just having been with the credit union, as a kind of loyal member was a huge factor in a lot of our loan decisions because we wanted to really reward loyalty. So, we cared about like what percentage of their banking that they were doing with us because we really wanted them to come and bring their whole financial world over to us. So seeing them in that relationship, I think was the biggest thing that we would do that refinance. We bring down that 20% down to those much lower rates you were describing. And really because like I was saying, being not for profit, we're not there to just like charge as much interest as we possibly could. And in fact, when we have money left over, we know that what that means is, let's bring that down. Let's lower our interest rates, or on the other side, we'll pay people more for their savings. That's how we actually kind of revolve it back to folks. And that's kind of the cooperative difference in the credit union space.
So you end up making a decision on the relationship, not on the credit score.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Or you're not basing it on how much collateral one has, what asset base they already have. So it's people-centered as opposed to asset or credit scores and all of those different things. I have found that as I did property management, that the credit scores, this is my conclusion, this is Vernon Oaks, it's not the radio station or anybody else, but the credit scores discriminate against poor people. That's what I concluded.
Absolutely.
How you can miss a light payment, one car payment, and you go from, I don't know, $650 down to $400 or something with these huge drops. That may be exaggerating a bit, but huge drops in the credit score. Okay, sir, we're going to take our first break, and we'll be right back. I want to get into Zolidar when we get back. Please don't touch that dial.
Thanks, Brandon.
News Talk 1450 WOL AM, where information is power.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oaks. The program is Everything Co-op, and we have Michael Epperson on this morning with us out of Athens, Georgia. Michael, there's so much I want to talk to you about. You are an inspiring, you inspire me. But let's do this one. We talked about the behavior changes that you had to go through because you're diabetic, type 1. So we spent time talking about food. But what I have learned with my diabetes, the behavior that they really want you to deal with, the medicine, if you will, is food and exercise. So what did you do in the exercise world, or what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, so I think for me, it's largely being on a bicycle is one of my most, like, honestly favorite activities. And so it's been really helpful for me that it's also good exercise to be out on a bike. So that would be a big one, but also hiking as well. So I'm lucky that I live in the Piedmont area, of the U.S. South. So I've got some good, not too big mountains, but big enough, that I can have raise my heart rate pretty well getting up a mountain. So those are probably two of my favorite kinds of exercise. But, I'm also a runner. So just, making use of the space that I've got. I haven't been much on gyms, but, nothing against gyms. But yeah, I just more so find that, like, if I can get on a bike or just get on my running shoes, and that's how I get my exercise.
So you're an outside guy. Get outdoors, Get some fresh air. Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to clean that one up. And now I want to go to this intrinsic motivation. What do you mean by that? How do you define that? What is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, motivation just sort of being like, what is it that drives people to their behaviors that they choose? And so, when we contrast or talk about intrinsic motivation, it's often in contrast to extrinsic motivation, right? Which I think most of us have heard of before, this idea that like something from the outside is the reason that you're doing something, whether you're, being motivated by a reward or you're like wary of a punishment of some kind, that's more like carrot and stick. We often, as the kind of, synecdoche kind of representation of those, metaphors, but those are the extrinsic motivators that we're typically used to, like what kind of rewards do we give folks? But The intrinsic motivation, though, by contrast, is what is it that comes from within that motivates you to make a choice or to go in a certain direction. And so there's a really interesting book that I found really impactful called Drive, and I believe it's by Steven Pinker. Did I get that wrong? Just looking it up real quick. I can, yeah, make sure I get that author's name right. But anyway, the book is called Drive, and it's about intrinsic motivation in the sense of, what is it that leads to people making decisions based upon something within themselves. And so in that book, he identified three factors that are mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And so looking at autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and those three different things, I think that comes back to some of those are just directly in the co-op principles, actually, like autonomy and independence. But, when we talk about individuals, really what we're talking about is, people having the freedom to make their own decisions. And then with the mastery, we engage in skills that allow us to get better at things. We can see how we're doing at a particular type of a skill. Are we getting better over time? Are we becoming more masterful, you might say? And then purpose. So like, what is the bigger reason why we're doing something? And I think when we can bring as many of those three together as possible, we bring out more of that internal motivation, and we make it ultimately more satisfying for folks to engage in really any kind of thing, right? But including the cooperative movement as well. Okay,
so you've just defined in this intrinsic motivation what I have been looking at when a lady by the name of Dame Pauline Green said that co-ops help people come out of poverty with dignity. That dignity for me was having voice. In a co-op, people learn how to speak up, or if there's a conflict, ways in which to resolve the conflict where we could learn from each other. And that gets to mastery and purpose. But people feel better about themselves. People feel better about themselves so that their family members feel better about them and feel better about themselves. And then it spills over in the community. So this co-op has a major impact on individual people and families and community. And you defined it as intrinsic motivation. And that comes from the seven principles. And the one I liked the best was number 5, which was training, education, and information, which is the mastery part of it. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah, I know it.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, it's one of those, like, you can't choose your favorite child, right? But so it's you can't choose your favorite cooperative principle, but I'm right with you. I think P5 is definitely in my top couple co-op principles.
Okay. Can you give an example where you have witnessed either in the credit union space or the food co-op space or in the space with the Georgia Center where you really saw this motivation, intrinsic, that comes from within somebody?
Yeah, good question. So where did I most see that happening? I mean, I definitely saw it a lot in the co-op development center space, just because, what we were really dealing with when we support startups in the co-op development world is like people who have more or less a lot of times, it's kind of unfortunate to say, but like they've kind of had the working experience of like they work in a day job that pays their bills, but that is largely extrinsically motivating for them. That like they go there because they have to for some reason. They need the job for the money, the payroll, the salary. And that's what kind of what largely like orients and motivates that like day job aspect. But then on the side, they've got this like side project with like, oh, I want to start a co-op. And then they'll come to the Georgia Co-op Development Center and they'll say, I've got this dream. I've always wanted to, I don't know, let's example we were just looking at in Minneapolis. So making hot sauce, like let's make a worker co-op that makes hot sauce. To do that, they have to have so much intrinsic motivation because there's not going to be any outside force that's like, you need to go make a hot sauce co-op, So they have to find it within themselves of like, okay, well, I'm going to put in that time after I clock out at the end of the day to try to like make a business plan and to recruit other people to become worker owners with me in this hot sauce co-op and to develop a marketing plan and all these things that go into, and they start to realize, like working with us, there's a lot to a business plan, and we can give you simplifying tools. So we'll give someone a business model canvas, and we'll say, here's, I don't know, however many, 10, 12 questions or whatever, and be like, if you can answer those, you've got a business plan. That's great. And you could spend anywhere from like 2 hours on that. You could spend 2 years on that, working on a business plan. But people have to find it really within themselves, to start that co-op. So that was one of the things I really loved the most about the co-op development space, really, is like seeing people come with that intrinsic motivation and the dream that they have of like, what is that co-op that they really want to build? And it speaks to their passion, something that they have. And that's, again, back to those principles, the intrinsic motivation principles, like autonomy, mastery, and purpose. I think all three of those are coming up when people try to start co-ops. It's something that they want to master. It's something that they're doing autonomously out of themselves. And it gives them a sense of purpose too. So in a way, I kind of felt like I was almost like a dream doula in a way. That's maybe a weird thing to say, but like, I want to help birth this dream that they're having. And it's so intrinsic. Yeah.
So it sounds like you got a lot of value out of helping people start their co-ops and really helping people to realize their dream. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
So you mentioned Minnesota. We met this past week in St. Paul. I was there Thursday, Friday, Saturday, left one Sunday at the Black Co-op Agenda Conference. And I give a shout out to Ron Hance that started that 3 years ago. Cooperators, black cooperators particular, but it's not solely black cooperators, but it's from folks all over the U.S. and growing. So, and out of that came the national NABC, National Association of Black Cooperators. Okay. I was not in any of those rooms where they talked about hot sauce, so I didn't get that experience. When it's a good conference when there were like 3 or 4 sessions every segment, every 2 hours or 3 hours, and I was amazed that I was in a segment every hour, each one of those. But it's a good conference when you couldn't go to all of the ones you wanted to go to. So great conversations. So
absolutely, yeah. I was lucky that I was there with 2 of my comrades from Athens who were also taking notes in their sessions. So now we're like swapping notes. That's kind of the hack.
Okay. So is that book called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us?
That's exactly right. Yeah, Daniel Pink. Yep.
Daniel Pink. Okay. I have to see about getting that one. So let's go go ahead.
Yeah, it's a quick read. I definitely recommend it.
So let's go to Zolidar.
Yeah, Zolidar. Let's talk about it.
Tell us what it is again and what it is that you do there.
Yeah, so again, we're building the employee ownership easy button. And so what that's going to be is, an app that helps people, again, who are either those small business owners, maybe on the brink of some kind of a sale or transition, as well as the advisors to those same small business owners. And my role is as a, employee ownership subject matter expert / domain expert. And really what that means is, trying to meaningfully figure out and curate the kinds of information that'll be most helpful to those folks as they go through that transition process. And ultimately make it easy for folks that way.
So you have a sense of how many businesses get turned over, purchased, are available in the U.S. at any given time?
Yeah, so I was just, kind of looking at this, and we know that it's really about at any given time. So we know that in terms of how many successful sales there are anyway, there's usually about 20 out of every 100 are going through successfully. With the total number of them, though, that are going through, I actually looks like I took away that particular note for myself. But anyhow, the key takeaway, though, is that we know that it's really about a 20% success rate currently for those who are kind of on the market, if they're looking for some kind of a buyer, whether that's, and that's really across buyer types, including all types of third-party buyers, such as like what we call strategic buyers. So those are like maybe like a competitor of the business or someone else in the same space, or a financial buyer as well. So those are more like the private equities of the world where they're flipping businesses, for a profit.
So I've got about 6 million U.S. businesses,
Right.
which 3 million of them, about half of them, are owned by baby boomers.
Right.
And what does that do? What does that mean for this world? For this?
Yeah. So yeah, those 3 million out of the 6 million, I mean, that represents basically what has been called the largest wealth transfer in the United States history. Because what that means is the ownership of those businesses will be changing hands, right? So a lot of those are small businesses that maybe have one or a couple owners, and it's a question of like who's going to be on the other side of that transaction. Somewhere around the range of more than 90% of the employment in the U.S., as well as 44% of the GDP comes from small and medium businesses here in the United States. So it's a huge amount of economic impact that we're talking about when we use this term silver tsunami, which you were just describing, of those 3 million businesses owned by the more than 73 million baby boomers in the US. So it's going to be a giant wealth transfer of like who is going to now own those businesses on the other side of that transition once they go through retirement over the next 10 years or so. And we see those 3 million business owners transferring the hands of their business. And we want to position Zolidar as kind of a key partner in bringing that toward the employees. And we do that in a couple of different ways, and thinking about employee ownership and worker co-op is a big part of that, but also we are kind of bringing in ESOPs as well as EOTs as just kind of a suite of flexible options that allow folks to really think about multiple different ways they could potentially sell that business.
So what's the ESOP and you say EOT?
That's right. Yep.
What are
Yeah. So yeah, the ESOP is it's an employee stock ownership plan, and so it's a qualified retirement plan under the Retirement Act of 1974. And the result of that is this legislation called ERISA, creating the ESOP as a retirement vehicle for employees. The result of that is that it's a fairly highly regulated kind of trust creation that ultimately creates a retirement benefit for employees who, once they're retiring, what they're really tapping into is the value of the business at the time of retirement. And so they're getting a payout that's usually in addition to a 401k. So folks are more so familiar with like a 401k as a retirement plan. The ESOP works with the 401k to kind of have a couple of different ways to generate that benefit when folks are getting toward retirement. And yeah, I can say more about it, but that's kind of the high level.
So I am 76 years old. I'll be 77 this year, born in 1947, so I fall in the baby boomer category. I don't know, what are you, millennium or Gen Z, or I don't need to know that. But anyway, I'm a baby zoomer. I'm a baby zoomer category. And you said 73 million baby boomers in the U.S. in 2022. And half of the businesses are owned by these baby boomers. And it's called a silver tsunami because most of us are gray, if not died. We're gray. So the tsunami of businesses coming on the market, and if you said out of 100, only 20% gets sold. So 80% of those 3 million businesses, if this stat holds up, just closes their doors. And those employees lose their employment, and the community loses the business. So and the owner, because I closed mine down when the employee, I went through a sales process that did not work, and I tried to sell it to the employees. They decided they did not want to buy it, so I closed it. And it was also interesting that as I was closing it, some of the people I was looking at came and wanted to buy it, but okay, timing always. So I understand the asset I lost and the assets that the employees lost was in that business. And you were there to try to make sure that if Zolidar was available, it may have helped me to sell it to the employees.
Absolutely. And, and we're also, I think, very aware that, a business, if we just put it in like very simple financial terms and we just think of a business as an asset, it's, what we would call an illiquid asset, in the sense of what is the cash value of this thing, this business? And how can the person such as yourself, who also were thinking so much about how many years of blood, sweat, and tears did you put into that business? And you're left with the question of like, well, what's this thing really worth? How much can it get out of it when I'm trying to step onto my next phase of my life? And so it's such a unique kind of asset when you own a business and you've invested that kind of personal stake in building something when you're a small business owner. And we want to honor that, by also saying that not only, we want to create these win-win scenarios where you'll get something fair out of that sale, and those employees will then be able to continue and run that business, hopefully even more successfully in the future. So we're really about kind of, those win-win kind of scenarios that, not only hopefully avoids the thing you're describing, which is like, well, we just had to close. We think of that as kind of the worst case scenario, but we could actually have like really the more ideal scenario, right? Of like, let's sell it to the employees, and if it's an ESOP, we'll create this great retirement benefit. If it's a worker co-op, then we're building something that has a little bit more of that upfront build of they'll have a capital account and they'll have some profit sharing going on. Also with an EOT, so they're also more short term in terms of the profit sharing aspect. So like, let's help employees tap into the value of that business a little sooner. And we want to give all these like flexible options that say that not only is it possible, but we can actually also find the type of employee ownership that fits the best for your situation.
So what does the app do? You say it's a one button app, but what does it do, and how would it have helped me in the process?
Yeah, so we call it the easy button. As the little nod there, right, to other folks who have made easy buttons. But I mean, right now, the way that we're thinking about the sort of the features is really to think broadly in terms of like understanding exit options and how they compare to each other. We do, like I said, we want to strongly build conviction and employee ownership, and we really want to help owners understand in a really tangible way that is also personalized to them what those options look like, especially related to the financial aspects of selling a business. Kind of like I was saying about like, what is the value of this illiquid asset? We want to help folks get their head around that, and also just want to like underscore that like we're in the earlier phases, and so the sort of the sky's the limit in the sense of like what we could ultimately build. And part of what I definitely wanted to convey to like the listeners today is like, please go to our website, because that's a great way to like fill out the contact form, and you can actually sign up right now to become one of our user testers. Obviously we can't pick everyone who signs up, but if folks are curious to actually really get hands-on with it, I definitely encourage go to zolidar.com and fill out
Can you spell it for us?
Yeah, absolutely. That's ZOLIDAR.com, Zolidar.com. And then you'll see like a little contact us form. And so that's a way for folks. And again, this is not only the small business owners, but also if you're someone out there who, maybe you're a CPA, you're a business appraiser, you're a broker. There's lots of different other folks who we know like advise small business owners. We want them to along for the journey, because we want them to also think of this as a tool that can really fit well into their toolbox as they're kind of advising their clients who are small business owners.
So have you found that when you talk about those financial people, that banks or credit unions get involved in these conversions?
They are, yeah. So it looks a little different historically in terms of like which of those types of employee ownership, which types of financial institutions have been most interested, because investment banking arms of big banks have been involved with ESOP transactions for many decades. I think with worker co-ops, it's a little bit more recent that some banks and credit unions have gotten a little more engaged. And of course, now we've got more, CDFIs, such as shout out to Shared Capital Cooperative, who was at the conference, as well as MDDC, the Metropolitan, MCCD, I got the acronym wrong. Mm-hmm. Metropolitan Consortium of Community Developers. I got to make Electra proud that I got the name of her organization right. So those types of CDFIs are also, supporting these types of employee ownership transactions. It's becoming a little bit more common, but it's still, we need a lot more bank involvement, I think, ultimately.
So Rothdale Capital is another CDFI that's in this work. I want to give a shout out to John Hoseclaw, that NCB helped to get started. Now, National Co-op Bank, they've been our main sponsor for we're almost 11 years now in this radio show, and they've been our sponsor since then. And their mission is to support and be an advocate for America's cooperatives and their members, especially in low-income communities, by providing innovative financial and related services. So it seemed like they would be an excellent partner for worker co-ops or any other type of co-op that wants to get, that they could be a part of the stack and in terms of providing innovative financials. And that innovative financial is looking at the relationships much more than who signs the document and how much collateral that person has. So I had to give a shout out to NCB. You gave a shout out to Electra and MCCD.
Yeah.
Okay. Shared Capital, Christina. Oh, just lost her last name. But they
Jennings. Yep.
Yeah, Christina Jennings. Though they've been around quite a long time. They do great work. 45 years, I think, is what they said. Okay.
I'm a brand new board member of Shared Capital, so I'm very proud of that as well.
You are?
I am, yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. My first board meeting is right after this, actually.
Well, tell Christina I said hello.
Hello.
In terms of P6, which is cooperation among co-ops, I've been working with Christina and John Holtzclaw and a little bit with NCB to see about housing co-ops taking their savings, they call it replacement reserve, replace the roof, get money to replace the roof and whatever else, the parking lot, but putting that money in savings in these institutions such that they can make loans to help create other co-ops or enlarge or help co-ops to grow. So this is something I've been working on. So I worked really well with Christina. And I've been always amazed at, shout out to the Northeast Co-op Fund.
One in the Northeast, yep.
They are just, people pay their bills back. They have very few folks that don't pay. Have you gotten into the why of that yet?
Yeah, I mean, not yet, sort of, from a board perspective with Shared Capital, but it's not at all surprising. Yeah, that I think it's for the same reasons we've been kind of discussing here. I think that when we're starting to tap more into people's intrinsic motivation, it brings out the best and the fullness of people. And I think that's part of why, we're ultimately often more successful. Statistically, co-ops fail less often as businesses than traditional for-profit businesses, and I think that's also similar with kind of the more consistent repayment of our loans, making it through those hard times like COVID-19. We just do that better, I think, because we're inviting in the full human being into that kind of business equation and doing things like relationship-based lending, like we've been saying. I think that all fits these values and principles. And yeah, I think that's why we're seeing fewer defaults in the lending to co-op space.
So Christina had told me that they have a 2 to 3% default rate, but none of the people that have invested in them have never lost a penny. Never lost a penny. Yep. In 30 seconds, what message would you like to leave people with?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Vernon, for this opportunity today. I do want to, again, encourage folks to go to Zolidar.com, learn more about us, and sign up for that contact form. And also to say that even though we are thinking a lot about the silver tsunami, it's really not just for retiring business owners. Really, it's anyone who wants to think about a transition to sell their business to their employees, whether you've been in the business 10 years or 40 years. We want to have that conversation. And yeah, we just want to make it easy for folks. So come say hello to us.
Thank you, sir. Michael, thank you. Everybody out there, we're glad you're with us today. We'll see you next Thursday. Please live cooperatively.
The preceding program was paid for by Everything Co-op.